But on the other end, I also see things like Fast and the Furious and how the proliferation of firearms in Mexico, and most of them, it's probably 70% of weapons in Mexico come from the U.S. Civilian grade AR-15s and handguns that are converted into full auto in Mexico, for example. Not all, but a lot of them do.
What can you explain what Fast and the Furious is for people that don't know?
Fast and the Furious was an operation that probably started during the Bush administration. It's not people like to use Obama, but it probably started. It started during the Bush administration. What I know of it externally, it started during the Bush administration, and basically a program that the ATF had to track small firearms purchases by gun runners in the United States. Let them basically buy a bunch of firearms that the cartels wanted, know about it, tell gun stores that, hey, let these walk. I know that's a very suspicious purchase, but let these go. Let these walk out of your store. It's fine. Them looking at these, following these gun straw purchasers, take them to a gun runner. The gun runner loads them up into a car and then drives them to Mexico, and nothing happens because they were attempting to follow these somehow.
They were attempting to follow where the guns were going.
Yeah, they're trying to track them, but of course, nothing was tracked, and a lot of these guns were found in murder scenes across the country. Including I specifically have this memory of these FN-57 pistols, high velocity round in these pistols that is able to go through soft body armor, and 50 cals in the box with the manual and everything, basically bought off an American gun store and sent down to Mexico. Some of them were used to kill a friend of mine. And I remember finding these, in the murder scene and not knowing where they came from, or they were pretty new and almost out of the box. And you start finding them everywhere. I only found out about them by watching the hearings related to the shooting of Ryan Terry. Federal agent shot with some of these guns that later were traced back to the ATF's Fast and Furious program. It is amazing that we know the names of these federal agents that were killed on the U.S. side with those guns, but we don't know about all the Mexicans that were killed with those guns on the Mexico side. And for people that might want to say that I'm being anti-American with this, and somehow I actually raised money for the Ryan Terry Foundation during a charity event for them, despite the fact that I know that some of the people involved in this whole situation might not know about some of the victims in Mexico about it. So I'm trying to be fair and balanced about my views and some of my activism work that I do in both on both sides of the border. But that operation did great harm to Mexico. There was probably some government participation as far as keeping it quiet after it was found out in Mexico by the Calderon administration. I'm almost sure about it, which was the administration in Mexico during that time, the administration that I was working under. So there was shady stuff happening across that border, but the sentiment or the mentality of Mexicans towards the United States after that happened changed. The trust in certain circles as far as the U.S. changed, and Mexico has had a long-standing relationship of good and bad with the United States. We had some student massacres that were related to CIA activities in Mexico.
Yeah, I've heard about those.
We had
I watched that documentary, The Last Narc. That was a very, very dark story. And they got Kiki Camarena, the DEA agent, and the CIA agent.
I mean, there's clear involvement with the CIA in Mexico utilizing drug running at that time to basically piggyback weapons trafficking down to the Contras. Mm-hmm. But there has not been any apology about that,
Is that story, has that been verified, or is that still quote unquote conspiracy theory?
It wasn't in my time, of course. I started working in the early 2000s, but I've met people that were from that age and that time, people that worked around that environment. CIA and CIA involvement in a lot of stuff in Mexico has long been known. Mexico City specifically has been a hotbed for, back then Soviet era espionage and activities. There's a few cases of Soviet spies being assassinated in Mexico. Fidel Castro spent a long time in Mexico City. Some of his revolutionaries actually trained in Mexico before they went off and took Cuba. So wow. It's been a hotbed of activity. If people want to equate it to something, Mexico has basically been a staging proxy war area for the United States and its enemies for decades. Mm-hmm. Starting off with the Soviets, I guess. And now you see influences from China in Mexico that seem to hint at some of the same kind of activity as far as a foreign entity influencing or involving itself in certain aspects of Mexico and the United States trying to combat that. So, now it's no longer spies being sent to Mexico to spy on the United States. Now it's a pipeline of fentanyl being pumped into Mexico to feed an American
before we go into the whole China thing, I wanted to, for people that are listening, if they're not familiar with the last narc, basically the story of that is there was a DEA agent working in Mexico. I believe his name was
Kiki Camarena.
Kiki Camarena, and he was kidnapped and taken to some sort of house, and he was tortured for days, and eventually, I forget how it was who blew the whistle on it, but essentially one of the guys that was in there torturing him, his name was Felix Rodriguez, who was a CIA officer. He was actually the CIA officer who was responsible for the capture of Che Guevara, I believe.
Yeah, there's a weird connection between that, the Bay of Pigs, Cuba,
and the Bay of Pigs. Yeah,
there was and again, this is Cuban intelligence, CIA operations all over Mexico. This has been going on for decades. But that specific case is interesting because to this day, that we just saw the recent recapture and arrest of Caro Quintero, who was one of the guys that was fingered for that.
Yes. And he was when they interviewed him, they brought him in front of the media for some sort of thing after that. And he was just sort of laughing and joking with everybody.
He's a scapegoat.
He's like, fuck you guys, I'll be out of here in 2 months.
No, he was a high level cartel guy. Mm-hmm. He got arrested for it. That was pinned on him. He was never extradited, which should be something that people should look into. He was freed under weird circumstances. Then made a run for it again. Then he was placed on the most wanted list by the U.S. Recently, and then he was arrested again in Sinaloa. Some people say he was betrayed, but he's never going to be extradited to the United States, I don't think.
Right.
And there should, I wonder why that is. What does he know? I don't know. But the interesting thing is that it was all pinned on him by the U.S. government. Has always considered him to be the responsible guy as far as that murder, that torture and murder of Kiki Camarena. There's a lot of questions there. There's a lot of again, the whole aspect of corruption only being on the Mexican side, or shady stuff being done on the Mexican side.